I ate them for lunch and was still hungry. When all was said and done, it just pushed me so far that I just got angry. And that's not like me, but I just said, all right, done. I've had enough.
Welcome to Water People, a podcast about the aquatic experiences that shape who we become back on land. I'm your host, Lauren Hill, joined by my partner, Dave Rastovich. Here we get to talk story with some of the most interesting and adept waterfolk on the planet. We acknowledge the Bundjalung Nation, the traditional custodians of the land and waters where we work and play, who have cared for this sea country for tens of thousands of years. Respect and gratitude to all First Nations people, including elders past, present, and emerging. This season is supported by Patagonia, whose purpose-driven mission is to use business to save our home planet. Thanks to all who entered our Season 7 giveaway by leaving reviews of the podcast. Adam Baldwin is the winner this season. He's scored a 3-night all-inclusive stay at the permaculture and surfing haven of Nulangkala in Indonesia. Congrats, Adam. Can't wait to hear all about it. Today, we're in conversation with Patti Paniccia, co-founder of International Professional Surfers, or IPS. That's surfing's original world tour platform. Through her experience in sport, journalism, and law, Patti has been a formidable advocate for gender equity in the water and in the workplace. She helped form the Hawaii Women's Surfing Hui in 1974 and was amongst the 6 women who competed on the inaugural IPS World Tour. In the late 1970s, Patti stopped competing professionally to attend Pepperdine Law School, where only 15% of her class were women. After law school, she transitioned into journalism, working as a TV reporter and anchor before becoming a CNN correspondent. In 1993, after the birth of her second child, Paniccia was fired from her job and replaced by a male reporter with no children. She then filed what turned out to be a landmark workplace discrimination lawsuit against CNN. She won, and the case made national headlines. Patti's the author of Work Smarts for Women and has taught as an adjunct professor at Pepperdine Law School since 1987, specializing in employment discrimination law and First Amendment law. In 2025, Patti was inducted into the Hawaii Waterman Hall of Fame.
Okay, Lauren, how does it feel having just had a chat with Patti?
I just wish that I had had the opportunity to connect with her sooner in my life, in my surfing life, in my writing life, in the work that I have committed myself to in and around surfing and pulling in more women's stories. I just feel like really ripped off for not having been able to connect with her sooner. She is such a vibrant leader, storyteller, surfer with, oh my gosh, so much to share about the realities of where surfing began as a professional sport.
Yeah, 100%. I am so grateful we got to have a chat with Patti, considering that when we started Water People podcasts 8 or so years ago, and even earlier than that when we were first together, much earlier, so yeah, 15 years ago, one of the things that we really bonded over and clicked about were these sort of stories.
Yeah.
Like how there's all these peripheral stories that shouldn't be peripheral, they should be central.
Yeah.
And that we had this really good fortune of being traveling surfers and getting to meet through just friends and connections some of these people and how incredible their stories are and the level of skill sharing too, you know, like this is not just like, oh, what a lovely conversation. This is like how to do life properly and better and how to upgrade ourselves and our cultures that we belong within.
Patti's story has been, whether willfully or otherwise, omitted from those founding of professional story narratives that we all have inherited. Why? Why do you think?
Oh, yeah, you know, it's just because she's superior. She has a better intellect, a better way with language. She has understanding of law behind her. She has journalistic skills and perspective, and also skill in the water. She's taken off deep and steep on the peak. And you look at the people who have been those journalists over the decades who keep resurrecting the same old stories. I don't know if I've seen them taken off deep and steep behind the peak at sunset. they might have been just sitting on the beach, smoking ciggies, drinking beer, doing that, and writing and speaking from the bleachers. And so she's a powerful force, and perhaps that has been a conscious choice from people who have resurrected those same old stories for decades, and it's the same old names. But, we could zoom in and be like, oh, that person, this person, but it's more of a systemic thing. And I do think that when she's speaking about those periods in time like 70s, 80s, 90s, I can't help but think of like my dad and his generation, belonging to that generation, and the lack of role models he had, because probably due to World War II and so many traumatized men either dying or returning from war and just unable to see past the next step in their day, the next step, not wanting to go into how they feel or others or whatever, just a massive level of disruption and trauma in that generation. So there's a bit of that too, and I feel like I have to think of where surfing sat at that point in time. You've got a place like Hawaii, huge military presence, was bombed, Pearl Harbor. A lot of the people who were in surfing were connected with the military. A lot of the things that we use within surfing, wetsuits, surf forecasting, surfboard technology, all came from military institutions in Southern California.
Yeah.
There's a lot of that culture and those sort of influences around those founding figures of the Western surfing story. So, that softens me up a little bit and go, oh, yeah, those men were maybe, struggling at that time and could have done a lot better. But here we are now. We can do a lot better, and it's a different world. And having these kind of conversations seems super important to me, because I want to know what the right language is. I want to know, how can I be kinder? How can I be more inclusive than that? Do you relate to that?
Oh, totally. I love hearing from the elders of surfing. Patty's in her 70s, and it's so interesting to hear how different the world was not so long ago and how similar it has continued to be. And so what a gift to be able to still have these conversations with people who have seen and experienced and helped shape the culture that we know from the start in its modern iteration anyway, and to learn from them.
Yeah, such an honor and a blessing.
Absolutely. So we always begin by asking about a time or experience after which you were never the same. Would you please share a story like that with us today?
I knew you were going to ask that. You told me. Okay, so I spent like the last week thinking about it whenever it came up, and I learned something about myself. What I learned was that nothing happened. I'm sorry to give you such a weird answer. I'm not trying to be difficult, but nothing happened to me. I would make decisions, and then I would just push to get them. Nothing said, oh, this happened, so it changed everything. Everything, all four of my careers were just, nothing happened that just, people used to ask me, how did you fall into CNN? It's like, no, nothing happened. I pushed my way in. And so it was all directed by me and thinking and pushing forward. Couldn't think of anything that really changed my life. I just kept pushing in one direction and then another. Of course, and surfing was that first big push, and always my heart.
Wow, that is fantastic.
We've never had that answer before. We've never had that
response. Such a considered response
no, it's
like
great.
That, though. No, it's fantastic.
It's great for people to know that that's an option.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because I thought they're going to think I'm difficult with the very first question. So I started to think, well, maybe when this happened, there's nothing I can think of.
What about meeting your partner?
My husband of 40 years.
Yes.
Of course, that was meaningful, and having my family, and they're always first in my life.
Yeah.
I don't know that it changed that much, but which was the question. But he's like the nicest person on the planet. I think he'd have to be married to me this long. I always tell him he needs me for excitement. We just celebrated our 40th anniversary, and we have 2 children. They're grown now.
Congratulations.
Yeah. Wow. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
I'd love for you to tell us about growing up in Southern California in the 1950s and how the counterculture that was bubbling up through the 1960s played out in your life, if at all.
Oh, gosh. I can remember when surfing came, in the 50s. I was born in 52. So, and it was for me, if we didn't live by the beach. I mean, my story is not like, it doesn't fall into the boxes like all my surfer friends, I lived in the ghetto. But I remember a skateboard is where, and I had my roller skates, and my dad gave me a piece of wood, and he put the roller skates on it. And I painted it black, and I wrote the word she-devil on it.
Oh, that's fantastic.
1962. I'm embarrassed to say that, but I would just go blasting down.
That's awesome.
So, that was when I felt coolest, There was nobody around. I wasn't showing off. I just felt the wind, in my face and, wiped out a few times.
Well, we all do. You're a first generation Italian American. I'm curious about how that cultural foundation shaped your experience as an American young person.
Yeah, my parents were immigrants. They didn't get a lot of what was going on around me at school, but they worked really hard and they did really well. It was like what we call, used to be anyway, the American dream. So I was kind of left on my own. And then I was able to explore. But I mean, we would eat pasta for dinner 5 nights a week.
Homemade.
And, oh yeah, everything. And I had a lot of Italian relatives, but there weren't a lot of Italians around me. And I didn't even go to like New Jersey until I was like in my 30s. And I went, oh, this is where my dinner table comes from, because it was the dinner table was like a microcosm of all of that. And all these relatives were like, oh my God. So yeah, I don't know. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, definitely. So you grew up away from the ocean. When did surfing seed itself into your life? And I'm curious about whether there were any early mentors in your watery life.
Oh, good question. My grandparents moved to the United States, and they got a little place, a duplex in Huntington Beach. And my mom used to drop me there in the summer. I think maybe she had too many kids. She just didn't get rid of one of them. And my cousin, she would meet me there too. But mostly it was just me and my grandparents. And she would go fishing off the pier at Huntington every morning. And it was for lunch. We would catch these little halibut, which you can't do now, but they weren't, rare then, overfished then. And we would fish off the pier, and I would watch guys surf from where I was fishing. And I made up my whole vocabulary. I remember thinking, and I telling my grandmother, Grandma, it's a smooth day today. And I think that meant glassy, So that's where I thought, oh, I want to do that, It never occurred to me they were all men. And I was a little kid, 11, 12, whatever. But yeah, I think that was the first. And she would go back to her house for lunch and make us lunch, and she'd drink a little wine and fall asleep, and I say, Grandma, I'm going back to the beach, and she'd go, oh, okay, goodbye. And I would stand by the water. There was no leashes back then. I would stand by the water, and as soon as somebody lost a board, I would run get it and carry, wade out and say, here's your board, can I try it? Quite pitiful, right?
So sweet.
And also, where were my parents?
Did anyone ever share? Was it a cultural?
2 guys.
Yeah. Oh, 2.
Yeah.
So when did you get your first surfboard that was yours?
I started babysitting, and I saved $114 because that's what it cost. And I bought it at the Greek surf shop in Huntington Beach.
Wow. Do you remember who had made that?
Yeah, it's so funny. It was signed by someone named Weasel. And it was a 9.6 Maui model. And I was talking with Tom Parrish, who Tom is. And I had, and he had heard me say, does anybody know who Weasel was? And he actually got back to me. He goes, oh yeah, he was, and he gave me his name. I said, I want to meet him. And he said, oh, he's passed away. So I never got to thank him,
Did you write she-devil on your board?
No.
Oh,
I'm
you
going to
should
write that
have.
down because I told you right.
Yes.
But you know what? I have to tell you this story. This is the honest to God truth. Where we lived was not just a regular intersection, but it was 5 points where 5 different roads came together. You know how they all cross with big intersection and traffic lights. And we lived on the point of one of where the 2 roads come. My front, there were cars going all around us. This is when I was really little, but there was a billboard in my front yard. And this was before I'd really seen Huntington, but I used to climb that for fun, going across and it wasn't really high up off the ground like they are now. They're like 40 feet up. It was probably, I don't know. I found some old, not video, but film. It was that, stuff without sound they used to shoot. And it looked like about 15, 20 feet. It seemed higher.
Yeah,
that
when
was
you're
my
little.
idea of a good time. So that's where she-devil came from, maybe. And then I used to get busted doing that because at night my dad would come home and he'd notice splinters in my hand and go, "You've been on the billboard." And,
Did you have brothers and sisters, Patti, at that age? Were you running the pack or were you on your own?
Well, I had a brother who's 10 years older, a sister who's 5 years older, and another sister who's 2.5 years younger. But there were no friends or anything. Where we lived was very industrial. Like across the street was a junkyard and railroad tracks. So it wasn't like a neighborhood, But we moved up in the world. We kept moving up. So I remember the day we got a bathtub.
Wow.
I was running around the house. We're rich. We'd only had a shower, which is actually better than most people in this world these days. So I don't know.
I'm curious about how Gidget landed for you.
Oh, Gidget. I loved Gidget. And she's a friend of mine, Kathy Kohner,
Yeah.
the real Gidget. I just love her. But the movie, I was a little bit older by then. I just thought, I want to, that.
Me too. Actually, she had the same impact on me a couple of decades later. Yeah.
Nice.
Well, I just found there were so few women captured as actually surfing, really.
Yes.
That she was one of the standouts, even when I was growing up in my surfing life in the early 2000s.
Wow. Yeah. She's an amazing person. She lost everything in the Palisades fire.
Oh, wow.
Did you know that?
No, I didn't know that.
Her whole house burned down.
Oh.
And I brought her an ornament from Hawaii last December because she said, I try to put up a tree, but I don't and so I brought her one from Hawaii and gave it to her. And, they moved to a condo instead. They had a really nice house. It was her parents' house. And she said, this is all we can do at this age because she's well into her 80s,
Yeah. Yeah, we haven't had her on the podcast yet, but we'd love to. Hope we get to.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so at some point, your family transitioned to living in Hawaii. Can you tell me about what led to that move and how it impacted your surfing life?
Yeah. Now, there's an answer to that question if you were asking my dad. He grew up in New Jersey and Trenton, and a dirt poor immigrant, not enough to eat, all of that, and then hanging out in pool halls, which at the time were, not great, and, shining shoes and at age 6 and, selling newspapers. But World War II happened. And when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, my father joined up.
Wow.
And they sent him across the country after training him, across the country to California and then to Hawaii. And he was here for 6 or 8 months camping out at the Pali on the other side of the island. And they put him on a ship, and they were on their way to Japan to be the first invasionary force, which is like, Utah Beach at North, But on the way, they dropped the atomic bombs. And so instead, he was the first occupying force, but it was a peaceful occupation. But the bottom line is he saw a lot. He had been taken out of this, not a great neighborhood. And he went back to my mom. He got married right before he left, and my brother had been born. He said, I've seen things. We need to go. We're going to go to California and Hawaii. That's what he said. And so, he slowly, they moved there before my sister was born.
Did he continue? Did he continue in the service, or did he leave after? Yeah.
Yeah, he got discharged after World War II. He was an enlisted guy. It wasn't his career.
Yeah.
And was his response when you said, Patti, there about wanting to take you all to California and Hawaii? Was that because he felt they were more peaceful places, more healthy places to raise a family, or what was his motivation?
Or was it about
there?
opportunity?
I think so. I think that he thought life was just downtown Trenton, New Jersey, which is, not great. And he came out to California and to Hawaii, and life looked good, And he started his own cabinet making business, and then he became a contractor, and then he started building things, and, he, did well. Yeah.
How old were you when you all made the move to Hawaii?
Well, I always ended up, for a long time, I was going back and forth, just like I do now. I think the first time they had to drag me here, I think I was like 12. It's like, no, I don't want, I'd rather stay here with all my friends doing drugs. That's the neighborhood we were in. And eventually it occurred to me after a couple years went by, that, well, have your choice. This neighborhood, which was okay. We had moved up a little. It was kind of a middle class neighborhood in Los Angeles, or Hawaii, and it occurred to me, oh, okay, yeah, Hawaii,
And where were your early surfing experiences there?
In Hawaii.
Yeah.
Waikiki, Ala Moana, Rock Pile, Kaisers, Diamond Head, Haleiwa, for the North Shore. I was in the Haleiwa Surf Club. And that was an experience because all those guys, the young ones, they went on to be pros and stuff, but we were just the local kids, Yeah, it was all those places in the beginning.
Were there many women on Oahu that you got to surf with at that point?
Not really. Not until I was like, maybe 17, 18. Then there were some, but there was never a lot. There were never a lot of women.
Who was your first surfing buddy?
Oh, Sally Prang. I don't know if you've ever heard of her, but she always surfed better than me. She would say, I sold her a board I had. Or no, she sold me a board she had because she thought she was going to move to the mainland, but that only lasted a month. But she said, how much do you want for the board? And I said, she wanted 40 and I offered her 20, thinking we would negotiate because, I'm from and she's from Hawaii. And she goes, okay, if you can only afford 20, that's okay. And I'll paddle out with you tomorrow and see if you like it. And that was like, I have a friend,
That's so sweet. That's so sweet. Okay, so
well,
how did you get wrapped up in the pioneering of professional surfing? When did that step happen from being a sort of casual young surfer into being part of creating what would become professional surfing as we know it today?
Wow, that was not like an overnight thing.
No.
Well, first of all, I was living in Wailua, so this is like the North Shore. And so, I don't think I was really ready to surf the North Shore, but that's where I was. So we jumped into it, and so pretty soon it was okay. It was, I wasn't going to drown. So first we formed the Hawaii Women's Surfing Hui. And that was we were just trying to help other women and trying to get more women in the water. And that was like some really awesome women, some of whom are still my friends today. Sally, Linda McCrary, Rel Sun, Jeannie Chesser, Lynn Boyer. You probably know those names from surfing in the 70s. Laola Lake, Claudia Nueva, and more, yeah. And so we would meet and we had an expression session and we did all these things to try to bring attention. We had ding repair classes for young girls. And I think Lynn Boyer was only about 14, 13. She was just a little redheaded kid out at Kaiser's. So we, brought her along too. And so one day I remember this distinctly. They said, okay, somebody needs to go talk to Fred Hemmings and tell him that he needs to have women in their contests. And somehow it was me. I don't remember how that happened. And somehow I had a title. I think we made up a title so that I could go see him. It was like pro competition director, but we were, And I called Fred, who I'm going to have lunch with tomorrow, by the way. We're still friends, but the way it started out was a little dicey because I called him and I said, hi, I just cold called him. And he said, who do you think you are trying to tell me how to run my contest? So, but we met for lunch and he listened to me. After a while, I realized he wasn't as tough as and I was like 19. I was intimidated, very much so. But, and then, at the time, there was no criteria for women, so or men, but the only woman he had invited had been in Playboy magazine. And she's a really good surfer, and I love her dearly. So this is not about her. But I wanted to, he let me run a qualifying contest, basically, for women. And he said he would take the top 6 and put them in his contest, So we did this for a little bit. And then one day he said, I'm going to launch IPS, International Professional Surfers, and Randy Rarick's going to run the men's division. Will you run the women's division? And that's when what he said was, since you think you know everything about women's surfing, why don't you come and work with me? And I still tease him about that. And I will tomorrow too, because usually we go out to lunch, me, Fred, and Randy, friends for life. And we'll sit down and Fred and I will start to argue, about women's rights and all this stuff. And Randy will put the menu over his head and then he'll go like this, are you two done yet so we can order our lunch? So that's the nature of our very loving relationship.
Wow. Wow. And so what do you talk about? Like, what would be in those conversations that get you fired up with each other and yeah, in that dynamic?
Good question. He will taunt me on purpose. And sometimes I'll just say, I'm not taking the bait, Fred. But he'll start talking about women's rights and stuff. And I've told him, don't try, because I'm a lawyer now and I teach gender and law, and you're going to lose. But, it doesn't stop him. And, he'll just say whatever he can. I think sometimes he knows he's saying ridiculous stuff, but he just enjoys it.
Provocateur.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel so frustrated at the writers and media makers of our surfing narrative for the way that your name has been either accidentally or purposefully omitted from this foundational role you've played in shaping surfing industry, culture, sport as we know it. Were you familiar with Patti's name in this way that we know Fred Hemming's name, we know Randy Rarick's name. Yeah. Your name has not been celebrated in the same way.
Yeah, that makes me think of, like Patti, you were just saying with your friend who was invited to surf in the competition, and largely because of the Playboy shoot draw card for media or whatever, and that you don't hold that against her. You hold that you hold your gripe with the system that enabled that to be happening. And so I think a similar thing. I'm just like, how unfortunate that for so many decades, a lot of people have fallen into those media maker positions because their buddies were in there and they hooked them up with a job, and they didn't take up those positions with any exposure to anything like what you teach, Patti, any kind of awareness of the power of the words that they use, and the repetition of, I guess, low risk stories too is a perspective I've had for years. I'm like, these magazines, websites, filmmakers and everything are choosing these same old stories because they're kind of low risk. They're not going to piss anyone off. They're going to keep their sponsor money coming in, and they just kind of continue business as usual. And that's one of the biggest motivating reasons we started this podcast 8 or so years ago, was because at that time we were so fed up and, Lauren, like frustrated by hearing the same names over and over and the same stories over and over, when we knew there were people like you in these positions in the surfing organism that
and who had
so
grown
much story,
who had grown so far beyond the tiny surfing bubble, like had blown the few dudes who have been celebrated as lords out of the water by meteor light. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
So we're just showering you with appreciation, and we're so stoked and honored to be able to have this conversation with you, and also to perpetuate it and share it with others for some perspective and to change
And
this.
to crack open for so much of even my surfing life, working with brands from, the time I was maybe 17 until now, still working with surf brands. For so many of those years, I was told there just aren't enough women surfers to justify putting time, energy, and resources into funding films, into funding magazines, into funding stories or surf trips, giving you all the resources you need to upskill. And it seems like it was very similar during your day as well.
Oh, I think you're making me so happy to hear this. It's a very enlightened perspective because, it's my favorite quote from a federal court when a young woman sued Brown University when she was told under Title IX that she couldn't they didn't have the same amount of scholarships for women. They said because there were so many more male athletes. And the court said interest and ability rarely develop in a vacuum. They evolve from opportunity and experience. And that's what was never given to women in surfing. So they just perpetuated. And even now, WSL finally said we have equal money, but they don't have equal opportunity. They have 16 women and 32 men, or I can't keep up with the numbers. I know it's not even yet, but opportunity and experience, So I know you're based in Australia, and I'll tell you one theory I have. Australia didn't want to be on the first world tour for the women, just the men, okay? And there was no internet back then. So the Aussies never saw us. We went to Africa, we went to Rio de Janeiro, and then there were three contests in Hawaii, but not in Australia until the following year. And so there's this whole continent that argues with me sometimes and says, no, you weren't on the first tour. And it's like, hello, over here you weren't on the first tour, And when the WSL did that Founders Cup at the Kelly Slater Surf Ranch, they put a plaque up with 8 men who they called the founders of pro surfing. And one of the men, it was like Fred and Randy, and then, Ian, who did ASP, and then some world champions. And one of the men said to me, oh no, we talked about it, but you were not, we didn't include you because you weren't there, and you weren't at our meetings. And I told him, you weren't at my meetings.
Good on you.
What I said, but
Totally.
It's still up there. And then a few years later, they put up a second plaque for when in the 80s when Debbie Beacham, and they named Debbie Beacham and stuff. But I don't want a third plaque. I always say, I want them to fix that first one. It's because when I spoke at, and your friend Paige Alms, who is just awesome,
She is.
She's what we envisioned. When I spoke at the Women's Magnitude Awards, Red Bull Magnitude Awards, those women had tears in their eyes because I showed our history, and I had slides behind me of us surfing, and I had the horrible headlines that were written about us. But the fact is that they had no idea. And that's the reason I want the plaque, not for me, because there's other women who belong on it too, not just me. It's like they can't keep doing that, but it does sort of, it gets repeated and repeated and repeated, and then that's the history. So it's hard to change.
Yep, that's what we're trying to do with the podcast in our own small way, and also it's a huge part of the work that I've been trying to do over the last 10 or 15 years is to keep injecting women's stories to dispel the myth that we haven't been there all along. Yeah, and to create
when
a place.
I told them that they were there on the first tour, the whole audience said, what? And they were like, God. And they were coming to me with tears in their eyes. These are the leading women in the world. Angry.
Yeah, because there hasn't been a place for that history to live in an accessible and repeatable way.
Exactly. Yeah, I think I'm getting too passionate here.
No, it's great.
Not at all.
What happened a year ago was Fred and Randy were asked to speak at the Outrigger Canoe Club about, they have this dinner once a month where they talk about Hawaiian history, and sometimes it's surfing. And they said, well, can we bring Patti? And they said, who's Patti? So I spoke with them, but the crowd has, they've seen Fred and Randy forever. They said, we want to hear from her. So the three of us were, And Jody Wilmot Young was interviewing, she was the commentator. And at the very end in the Q&A, and it's true, and these were older women, not surfers, and men, and they just wanted to know about that. And at the very end, Billy Pratt, who's on the Duke Kahanamoku Foundation, took the microphone and said, we've inducted Fred into the Hall of Fame, and we've inducted Randy. We had no idea there were women, and Patti, your turn is next. And I thought, I just said, thank you very much. And I thought, yeah, right, And darned if they didn't do it last November. I got inducted into the Outrigger Duke Kahanamoku Hawaii Waterman and Waterwoman Hall of Fame. And it was like, after all these decades, it was, pretty wild because I never sought it out. It just fell to me.
Never too late to rectify mistakes. Like
one must wait until the evening to see how splendid the day has been. Socrates.
Wow. It's so great to hear you speak, Patti. Do you feel that there are other cracks that are letting the light in happening in that way?
What a good question. Then I would say it's, yes, women journalists, because they get it, and some men, and the younger generation, too, of men, or men who love women, who, have shared with them. And I do, because, after I gave that once keynote at Surfing Heritage and Culture Center, and when I sort of ripped into the surfing industry, and I also talked about surfing journalism, how they were calling, Gabriel Medina the world champion, and Stephanie Gill was the women's, like an other, like an afterthought. A very prominent journalist came up to me about 2 years ago, and he said, I've changed the way I write ever since then. And then WSL, Jody Wilmot Young, she asked me to go to lunch with her, and I had just kind of met her, and she invited her boss, Graham Stapleberg. I only met him once, and he said, they're pushing for equality, equal pay. And we talked about all these things, about why, and they've changed since then. And I don't think it's all me. I think, they were hearing from a lot of different people, but I was glad to have been a voice. And he asked me, and I said, well, you can either, in terms of the pay, you're going to lose if someone sues you using these county beaches, right? Because these are government beaches and you can't discriminate. So you can either get ahead of it and not get mowed down by it, and you can be the leader in it, But I don't know. Yeah. I don't think that my voice alone, did that.
You played an
Jody
integral...
says, that's why I invited you to lunch, Patti, because
You played an integral role. And of course, movement and change requires the hands and the hearts of many. And you were an incredibly important part of building this movement and building this change.
Well, I would best if you asked Graham Stapleberg. He probably wouldn't even remember the lunch,
But it's interesting to note that professional surfing's hand was forced, essentially. It wasn't necessarily a change of goodwill, if we have to categorize it.
It was. Threats of a lawsuit. It was not my threats, but I was teaching gender and law at the time, and I had a very good chance of and I told him that, I explained, why, constitutionally and legally, It's like a Title IX almost. If you're going to use county beaches, you have to obey the county laws about
for accessibility. So we've alluded a little bit to the sort of shadowy underbelly sexist structures of that early professional surfing tour. What made it great? What made it fun? What made that tour and your experience memorable?
That first world tour, 1976?
Yeah.
The first 1976 tour was great because we had never experienced it before. No one had paid attention to us. We had an expression session and no photographers showed up. It was like that. And then we'd had this horrible press, before we left and during. But it was just so fun, and the camaraderie with the women and the men on the tour. It was the first tour for everybody. We were like, wow, look at this, It was really great.
If you've enjoyed listening to the conversation so far, consider also subscribing to Water People on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. It'll help other people find the show. And if you're feeling inspired, leave us a review. We love hearing from you. And now a word from the folks who help make the podcast possible. Patagonia is in business to save our home planet. Founded by Yvonne Chenard in 1973, Patagonia is a surf and outdoor apparel company based in Ventura, California. As a certified B Corp and a founding member of 1% for the Planet, the company is recognized internationally for its product quality and environmental activism, as well as its contributions of nearly $230 million to environmental organizations. Its unique ownership structure reflects that the Earth is its only shareholder. Profits not reinvested back into the business are paid as dividends to protect the planet. Learn more at patagonia.com.au. Many of us look to supplements and special diets to maintain our health, but ignore the obvious. We are water. It's what we're made of, and it's what supports every bodily function. Primal water, the water our ancestors thrived on, is energized, alkaline, and made for real hydration. It doesn't come from the industrialized, often contaminated water systems most of us rely on. For the last 25 years, Alkaway has been researching and refining ways to mimic natural water systems. We invite you to learn more about primal water and support their charitable work with BirdLife Australia. Head to alkaway.com to score a $50 discount using code WATERPEOPLE. That's alkaway.com. What do you do when your sunglass lenses inevitably get scuffed or scraped? The top drawer of our kitchen island was where scratched sunglasses went to die, until we learned about the Sunglass Fix. They've been at the forefront of the repair revolution since 2006 and carry more than 600,000 lens options. So there's a solution for every frame. We found our sunnies on the sunglassfix.com and within a few days received brand new polarized lenses to easily install at home. 1 billion pairs of sunglasses are made each year, with hundreds of millions ending up in landfill. The Sunglass Fix offers free lens shipping in Australia and to 161 countries around the world, as well as subsidized express, tracked shipping worldwide for less than $5 in any currency. They're a proud member of 1% for the Planet and are ready to help make your favorite frames last longer. Use the code WATERPEOPLE for 10% off your purchase today at thesunglassfix.com. You've said that the early prospective sponsors of professional surfing saw you all, the first cohort of professional surfers, as, quote, a cross between mud wrestlers and Barbie dolls. I'm really interested. I'm really interested in this because from the start of trying to professionalize women's surfing in particular, there was this sexual edge. There was this sexualization that wasn't necessarily happening with men's surfing. What do you put that down to? And do you feel like it's been a strength or a weakness for growing the sport?
Which part? That it's
the sexualization.
Oh, yeah, that was left over from the 60s, the Beach Bunny era, you know? And I guess it's still around, but I don't see it as much. It's true. They didn't know what box to put us in. They wanted us to be sexy. They asked us to do wet T-shirt contests, you know, stuff like that. Mm. And when we were in Africa, we were surfing, and the men's was the Gunston 500, and Chapstick was the women's half of that, and it was a different sponsor. And the Chapstick ad guys, being the brilliant ad men they were, when we arrived, they said, well, we don't have the money for your prize money, so we're going to hold a nationwide raffle, and the winner gets a date with whichever one of them he desires. And we have a wet T-shirt contest, too.
Oh, my
so
Lord.
They saw us as, you know, and we said no, but they saw us as being able to exploit us like that, you know. And we kept saying, we're professional athletes, even though we had been so for a week at the time. You know?
Fake it till you make it, huh?
Yeah. We had so much fun, especially in Rio de Janeiro.
When you look back, what were the unwritten rules about being a woman in the water?
On the North Shore, I don't know that I encountered unwritten rules. I think a lot of the guys assumed, like they do for men too, but it's maybe more so for women, that if you're out there, you probably don't know what you're doing. Yeah. And I've rescued guys at Laniakea. One was the lifeguard from Florida, and another one, you know, so it's like, you know, these surfers that come to, Hawaii, especially in the 70s, and they're going, oh, I can surf here. And then they go, oh, what's a rip? So I just know that I better take off on a solid wave for my first wave, and I'd better not wipe out on the takeoff, or I won't, be getting any more. but it was usually pretty friendly. And I surfed with a lot of the local guys from Haleiwa and Wailua too, and that was always fun and good.
Is there much of a change, do you feel, in lineups these days to early days for you in the dynamic between older and younger men and women in any way at all?
I'm not in the lineups like today, you know what I mean? So I'm usually paddling out on, I always say I used to surf great big waves with little tiny boards, and now I surf little tiny waves with great big boards. So I'm not out in the lineup, but I can just tell that they're not going to disregard or disrespect a good woman surfer at all. You look at how many there are. You know, I can just go sit on the beach and watch and, you know. Yeah.
Patti, I'm really interested in your transition out of professional surfing and into being both a reporter and a law professor. Was there a moment in your surfing career where you thought, oh, this sort of bias, this discrimination against us as women trying to build professional surfing, this is structural. This isn't personal, this bias. And I'm wondering if that realization changed or informed how you approached gender equity in your reporting work and in the law?
Well, when I went away to law school, there were only 15% women in the law school because it was still pretty new for women to go to law school.
Yeah.
But it didn't bother me. I was so used to it. But I'd been used to sort of pushing, right? And I felt like, ooh, with all this new information I'm going to garner here, being a lawyer can really, you know, they can't disregard me anymore. And I had been, you know, I would write to contest sponsors and they would answer Fred and Randy. You know, it was that kind of stuff, you know. But I thought, oh, I can write to people as an attorney. They're not going to, you know, disregard what I'm saying as much. So I liked that. I don't know if that truly answers the question. And, you know, and I did encounter that a little bit in TV news because, you know, you could be at a fire and doing a great job, you know, reporting. And, you know, your boss, if you're a woman, would say, you know, your hair was messed up. And, you know, or why were you wearing that penguin pin? You know, or, you know, it's just, and then the men, like they would tell was a woman at CNN. She was like a Capitol Hill correspondent, and she was overweight a little bit. And they told her, if you don't lose weight, we're not going to re-sign your contract. And then Peter, what's-his-face, during the Gulf War, I don't remember his last name, my God, this guy was bigger than her, and they idolized him. So it's like they used a different criteria for judging women on the air than men. And I was very hip to that. I was conscious of it. But I think I just played along, you know, played along for a while, you know.
What attracted you to reporting the news and storytelling on air? What was it about that job?
I finished law school and I took the bar in Hawaii, and then I took the bar in California. Most people can't handle one. I did too. One in the summer, and then the next opportunity would be the winter bar in February in California. And during that time, I was doing some work for some lawyers, and I hated it. I don't like arguing. You know, I just thought, oh, what have I done? You know, I made a little mistake. And then it occurred to me, and plus they had to wear nylons all day. I didn't like that. You don't have to do that now, but it was like, I had to sit down and think again. And I thought, if I have to do something for 8 hours a day, I better pick something that I really like, because I'm not liking this job. I liked law school, but I don't want to be part of this club. So I like teaching, though. I love that. It's a whole different occupation. You're just teaching law. So I said, I think I'd like to be like those reporters that we met when we were on tour.
Oh, really?
You know? Yeah. You know, I saw how they had access, and, you know, I didn't think the stuff they wrote was so great, but I thought I kind of liked that job. And I never liked it because seeing my face on TV, that actually, when people would recognize it, would just make the hair in the back of my neck stand up. I liked the access that I could go to some senator and say, why did you vote for that bill? You know, or, you know, I would meet the day's newsmakers, whether they were, you know, billionaires or lived in a tiny shanty, you know, homeless. I could meet people from everywhere and ask questions. And I had a license to do that. And I saw so much. And if these eyes are any indication, it's like, probably more than I needed to, because I saw a lot of shootings and I was first on the scene at plane crashes. But it's funny because I remember bringing my surf skills, the go for it attitude, into the reporting. And there's this whole macho thing that's like, if you cover tough things, civil unrest, I was in that, got shot at, it's like you surf big waves, there was like a little crossover there that was interesting. Yeah, I don't know if that's really answering your question.
Yeah.
It certainly does. Yeah. I heard something back a little where I felt like it'd be interesting to look back at those absolutely terrible journalist experiences you had on that first year of tour, where men were coming at you, women, and just having absolutely ridiculous questions for you or statements at you all. Was that at all a motivator for you to get into that world, to try and, like, I don't know, turn that a little as well? So not only about being in those juicy parts of the world where things are really happening and you're on that, you have access to all the things you were just speaking about, but also writing it a little, like correcting it because of how terrible your experiences were when you're on the road with journalists?
It would be really easy to say yes, but honestly, I never put that together.
Yeah.
I never did. I just wanted to cover the stories, no matter what they were. So it wasn't like I was on a mission to write,
To control the narrative.
Yeah, and then when you're a TV news reporter or a correspondent, if you're national like CNN, you don't necessarily get to pick your stories either. They give you this. You walk in the door, you don't know whether to wear, a little pink suit or a bulletproof vest. It's like, and you just go.
What did you learn about the power of storytelling in that work, Patti?
I learned to humanize it. I learned how to write a script. I mean, I didn't learn overnight. I interned as a news writer at a Los Angeles TV station, got my first job in Santa Barbara as not bad, for a small market.
Yeah.
That's where I met my husband. It's like, and I could surf there. And, and then I worked in local news in LA, and you're getting feedback all the time, for your writing, and then finally with CNN in the LA bureau, and your bureau chief or your assistant bureau chief, they review your scripts that you write. And you learn to, if you're going to write about a new law that's passed, you don't sit and talk about the legislator who proposed it and what the law is. You meet a human who's affected by it. In other words, you bring it home with, making people feel the passion of the story, among other things. That's what I learned about writing.
Yeah. Can you talk to us about how motherhood impacted your working life?
That could have been something that I could have answered that question with, but it was just one more thing. And that was when I really got angry, because when my first daughter was born, our first daughter, I had just been to Atlanta, CNN Center in Atlanta. Executive Vice President at CNN had said, "Patti, we love your reporting. What would you think about being a justice reporter? We'd bring you to Washington. You'd cover the courts. You'd cover the FBI, everything justice, And I was like, bring it on, I was ready to just move to, Washington, D.C.
Wow.
And I went back. And I guess I was like 6 weeks, maybe 8 weeks pregnant when I was talking to him. I didn't think I was supposed to say, "Excuse me, Ed, I didn't have a period last week." It's like, I'm not going to tell him it. You don't really tell people till you're 3 or 4 months out, right?
Yeah.
So a few months later, I was doing a live shot, and friends of mine in the newsroom who work, the assignment editors that work in the newsroom, I was coming over the satellite feed to Atlanta, and he said, "Look at Paniccia, she's fat." And that's what he said. And my friend said to him, "She's not fat, Ed. She's pregnant." And he said, "Another good reporter, down the drain, And so this was all testified to. And so I wrote him a really nice note, thinking must have gotten some impression that I wasn't going to, blah, blah, blah. Just want you to know. Maybe he felt upset that I didn't tell him when I was talking with him. I don't know. Yeah, just want you to know I'll be back and blah, blah, blah. So I come back and I'm not on the A team anymore. You could tell by the stories they send you out to, and he wasn't always complimenting my stories anymore. I was like, B team. 2.5 years later, 2 years later, I got pregnant with my second daughter. I've done it twice in my life. And when I was on maternity leave, they said, you know what, that's okay. We thought you were just auditioning for they said all kinds of things that were fake. And they said, we've replaced you with a man who doesn't have to worry about childcare. I said, I've never brought childcare to you. And they basically fired me. And they put it in writing, all of that. And they sent me a memo that said, maybe you should think about mommydom for a career.
Oh, my Lord.
Among other things, they said.
What was your response?
I tried first thing I did was start crying, but that was my initial response. But I got to be tough with those guys. I tried. I called a friend who worked in defending big companies against sex discrimination and other employee lawsuits. And I said, Pam, tell me, what lawyer's name do you see on the complaint that makes your side want to die? And she said there was one firm that, I got lawyer connections, right? There was one firm that brought us to our knees. And they said, can you give me the name of that firm? So I reached out, and initially they weren't interested, but there's one woman in that firm. And she said, what are you guys, crazy? We're taking this case, And I tried for a year. We deposed people. I tried to, they tortured me with deposition 5 days straight. I don't even think OJ went that long. They were really awful. They sent private detectives. This was a different time.
Yeah.
Right. And they were in Georgia. Georgia has, in the United States, each state has its own set of laws. Some are more friendly to businesses, some to employees. Georgia had no pregnancy protection law, but it didn't matter because I was in California and we did. But these guys didn't know that.
Wow.
And they were these guys from the deep South, and it didn't go well for them. And so then after about a year, now I'm really pissed. We held a big news conference and filed the case. And then it just I turned into, lunch for people. I either walked on water or I was the she-devil herself. But, because a lot of men were angry. Oh, who does she think she is, suing them, and the women were going, yeah, yay, it was very divided.
Was there something about your early experiences informing professional surfing and your experiences being trained as a lawyer that gave you a view to the institutional, to the structural, that empowered you to pursue a lawsuit? I feel like so many women who would have had a similar experience would not have had the understanding of the law, the experience of seeing structural bias as you did in surfing. And many women have just probably put their hands up and walked away without being vindicated.
Yeah. And God bless them, because I'll tell you why. They sought me out. And as I talked to all of them, and I never charged them, I didn't want to take their cases, but I would refer them to different lawyers I knew. But everybody's different. And let me tell you, it gutted me what they did. I didn't act like it did, but the stuff they were doing, they were like spying on me. And, it was awful. So I never told other women, you need to sue. I would say, here's your rights, but, you have to make this decision because this is what it entails. And, a lot of times they would go, I just don't want to make a stink. I think I just want to see if I can get another job,
Yeah.
And then they would get one and they would move on. And that's sad because it took a lot. It took a lot to do a high profile case. And you're luckier if it's high profile, because if it's not, they would eat you alive.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I ate them for lunch and was still hungry. When all was said and done, they just pushed me so far. They pushed me so far that I just got angry. And that's not like me, but I just said, all right, done. I've had enough. I waited a year because they sent out, there was this. They sent out one of their lawyers. And I had been friends with this guy because I knew more about First Amendment law than he did. And sometimes they would ask him questions and he would call me in the bureau when I was on deadline and say, hey, what should I advise? And so I was quietly giving him advice. They sent him out to make me an offer to come back to CNN after my deposition after 5 days straight. And I told my lawyer, I'm going home. I'm exhausted. I've been here every day for 8 hours. So my lawyer went out and he wrote me a memo. He said, when they went out for drinks after or dinner, or I don't know where they went, that this lawyer had started to get friendly with him and told him about how he was having sex with a producer. And I knew the woman whose name he used while they were watching, like the OJ chase and, or something like that. He was like, and I'm thinking, these guys don't learn. And so that was when I said, no, I'm not going to settle with them. And if I do take their offer to come back, they're going to hurt me in ways I can't prove. They just got smarter, you know? So, and that's what I tell my law students when I teach employment discrimination. I'm not teaching you this so that you can get your employer out of whatever mess they've gotten them. I'm teaching you so you know the law, and if they've done something bad, you settle that case. Don't use this information you're getting,
Yeah.
But yeah.
What role did surfing play in your life through this season, through early motherhood and obviously very busy career life?
I was still surfing. When I was in law school, I chose Pepperdine on the beach at Malibu. I was surfing the Boo every morning before class. I'd get to class. They say, stand up and brief the next case, and I'd lean over and all the salt water would come out of my nose, and all the other law students would look at me like, what a weird girl. And I'd always blow into class with soaking wet hair because I'd surf to the max, come home, shower off, take my wetsuit off in the shower and blast, three blocks away to the law school. But
that was
surfing always gave me confidence, I think, because I remember and I remember this so distinctly. In law school, you get one grade from one exam at the end of the semester. There's no quizzes. There's nothing.
Pressure.
That's it. Yeah, it's like taking a mini bar in each class, And so I was taking my very first exam, and the whole class was everybody was so stressed, and including me. And I sat there waiting for them to hand out the exam, and I closed my eyes, and I thought, wait a minute. I'm not paddling out to Big Sunset. If I don't do well, I'm just going to get a bad grade. I'm not going to drown if I screw up, right? And I opened my eyes and I was like, big deal. I didn't say that out loud. And then it was like, I'm a surfer. You can't hurt me with this exam.
I'm glad you brought up.
Is that corny? But it's true. It's so true. I'm not going to drown here today. Stop worrying.
Yeah, perspective.
I'm glad you brought up Big Sunset. I'd love for you to talk us through that iconic image of you dropping in, arms wide, wind blowing through your hair at Big Sunset. Can you set that day up for us?
I don't remember exactly when it was taken. I think it was Russ Kalish who shot it, because I have another photo where I'm same thing, but on a slightly smaller wave. I think that it was probably one of the contests, because I can see I've got like a jersey on, and it might have been the Smirnoff. Well, in my heat, I don't know if it was that day, but that was a big sunset day. I mean, I've got a picture of me and Al Chapman on the beach, and it's breaking on the outer reef, But in my heat, Fred's idea, we'll put one, you want to be equal? We'll put one woman in each heat of men. It's like, thanks, Fred, So in my heat was Eddie Aikau, Terry Fitzgerald, Al Chapman, Sammy Hawk, and me. I know.
I'm really curious, because there are people who push for a definition of equality in which men and women are surfing together in professional heats. Do you subscribe to that definition of equality, or is it something else?
That's one of the things Fred and I always argue about, because he said, you want to be equal, you get out there with the men, But I always tell him my quote, opportunity and experience, Fred. When you give us that, then we'll be able to compete against the men. Look at Moana Jones-Wong at Pipeline, look, they weren't doing that then. And if they had, they could have competed easily. But they never, we didn't get sponsors. We didn't get anything. We didn't even get, I tried to get wetsuits, but I have to tell you this funny story. Can I, about the wetsuits on the first
Absolutely.
tour?
Yes.
Okay. I have to explain it enough so you understand, but Tuzo Durger, I think, from O'Neill said, we're going to give all 6 women on the first tour wetsuits, full length. Because, 5 of us were from Hawaii. We didn't even own a wetsuit, let alone a full length. So they said, we want you all to take your measurements, hips, waist, bust, length, all this stuff. Well, we sent them all in. But, surfer girls got, right? And under our arms, we got these lats, right? So our chest measurements were really big compared to most women. So they get our measurements, and the women that were sewing them, I don't know, when they arrived, we couldn't zip them up because they had made it really skinny here, but they had these huge pokey boobs in them, thinking we had those chest measurements meant we had large breasts. We couldn't zip them up because they weren't big enough around under the chest, here where our muscles are. So the last minute, O'Neill sent, the usual boys' wetsuits for us. So, right. But I'll never forget that. We couldn't figure out why, funny. And it took me years until I realized, why did that happen? And it was so funny the way they poked out in front, empty, and you couldn't zip them past about, just below your chest, and then they wouldn't zip up.
You mentioned not being able to get sponsors, and I guess maybe the one exception to that was, can you talk us through Candy Pants?
Candy Pants. Yeah, we asked for sponsors, and the article they ran said we were curiosities endowed with too many male hormones. Thank you, Honolulu Star Bulletin. And then we did get a call from one guy who owned Candy Pants. They were edible underwear, red cinnamon flavored. And then he wanted us to be in a Waikiki display, wearing them, and it was just funny more than anything else. Of course, we said no.
It's good that you could take it that way.
Yeah, well, yeah, we were sad, but there was just something really funny about the whole thing. And we would joke, this is what we would say. Yeah, we were, I remember we were in my living room having a Hawaii Women Surfing Hui movie, and we were saying, excuse me, Mr. Visitor from Iowa or wherever, hungry? How would you like some Candy Pants? They kind of wanted us to do something like that.
Yeah. Wow. Is this in 76?
76. Yeah, I've got the clipping from all of this stuff. I still have them, all the clippings.
Patti, I've really enjoyed this conversation's sort of revisiting the language theme, where at the very beginning you mentioned being on the pier at Huntington and looking at smooth water and creating your own words, and then becoming this athlete and ambassador for other women in the beginning of professionalism with surfing. And you're encountering people that are lackluster with their language. Let's say that perhaps. And then you went into your, storytelling and journalism work, where you're crafting language, being very specific with language there, and looking for the human in the story. And now you're teaching, and I'm sure a lot of that is based around wordage and the language we use and the power of words. Where are you at with that now, where if you have an opportunity to speak to us and people younger than us entering the surfing community, the surfing organism, what are some of your dreams for the words we use, key words that keep coming up in the surfing organism, how we can do better with our language?
Oh, wow. You both ask such introspective, good questions. I don't know if I'm up to that level. I think that these days, I think they get the words. It's kind of like what I tell my students too, that I think they just know now how not to get caught. They know, they still have some of the same beliefs, but they're not stupid about it because they know, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I think you could be in a room without me there or any women, and you'll hear that kind of locker room talk still. Mm-hmm. I think it's still there. Dave, you'd know more than me, but some men, not all.
Patti, you've said that history wears the face of those who write it. Mm-hmm. If you could amend any of the popular surfing narratives that we hold as truth in our culture today, which ones would you take your red pen to, and how would you change them?
That the women were there the first year of the Pro Tour, not just the men. They were part of it too. And that we didn't surf very well. That was the narrative that they would give out. And the women who were here on the North Shore with me sure did. Becky Benson, Blanche Benson, Dale Kimura Dolan, Sally, me. There were only a handful of us on the North Shore, but all the guys that came from California, we surfed better than them. I thought. But, just in general, that the women didn't surf very well. And they'll still say that. They still say that. And that's why I showed some photos at that magnitude award, because I wanted them to see. So I think that would be two things of the narrative. That's such a good question. I'd have to think a little more beyond those two things. And also, what I really want young women to know is that we're all just part of a continuum. No one person does it all. And that they won't know that until they get older. You go into surfing and it's your generation and you loom larger than everybody before you because nobody before you knew what they were doing. And then as you get older, you realize there were people behind you and there's people ahead of you, and we're just all part of this path, right? I want them to understand that. And I want them the young women to understand that there's people out there like me who just love them to death for doing what they're doing, and for being like Paige, and all those women at those big wave awards. I was going, yeah, this is so cool. Nobody's calling them curiosities endowed with too many male hormones.
No.
So wrong on so many levels.
You've lived a big, rich life in so many ways. How do you reflect on surfing as a meaningful way of shaping a path through this time on planet Ocean?
How do I reflect on surfing? You mean making surfing meaningful?
Well, I guess I just mean, what can you tell young surfers about why surfing is worth putting their time into or not?
I see. I think I was just having a conversation with, who Matt Warshaw is? Yesterday, and I was saying, I don't know if this is weird to say, maybe some people will hate me for it, but I said, Matt, I never did post about other people did about my induction into the Hall of Fame. He said, why not? And I said, because at the time there was so much going on in our country, I thought it would feel shallow, when people are getting, there's a lot going on. And I didn't know, but then I remembered how much I escaped from the Vietnam War when all my friends were getting shot and killed. And to the North Shore is like, there was no TV or radio here. And so you just become surfing and you don't see or hear or feel, And I don't think that I'm not saying that it's an escape, but it's a healthy thing to do. And that's part of who we are. And that's what Matt was telling me, It's a healthy thing to do, and it's for your soul, right? It's for my soul. And, you can't just be fighting all the time, in this world. And you learn a lot. You learn how to keep your mouth shut in the lineup. You know how to maneuver the lineup and catch the wave you want. You learn how to, there's just a lot of social stuff that I think surfing is. It gives you confidence. It gave me confidence.
Time is precious. Thanks for spending some of yours listening with us today. Our editor this season is the multi-talented Ben Jake Alexander. The soundtrack was composed by Shannon Soul Carroll, with additional tunes by Dave and Ben. We'll be continuing today's conversation on Instagram, where we're at Water People Podcast. And you can subscribe to our very infrequent newsletter to get book recommendations, questions we're pondering, behind-the-scenes glimpses into recording the podcast, and more via our website, waterpeoplepodcast.com.